markets. My name is Luca. I'm an international climate policy analyst in the office of the chief energy economist at the International Energy Agency, the IEA. And I have the honor and the pleasure to be the master of ceremony and the moderator of this event. And on behalf of the IEA, please allow me to start by thanking the co-organizer of these events that include the government of Sweden, the Swedish Energy Agency, the Global Green Growth Institute, GGGI, and the Nordic Environment Financial Corporation, Nefco. The topic of today that we're going to delve into deals with Article 6. A robust and efficient Article 6 carbon market can offer the tools to mobilize public and private finance for climate action. And so in the next 90 minutes, we're going to have a high-level session that will explore the potential of Article 6 and carbon finance, along with evidence of progress on the ground to support the clean energy transition. The event will start with remarks from a minister from Sweden, in particular the Minister for Climate and Environment of the government of Sweden. And it was, we were supposed also to welcome the minister from Zambia. Unfortunately, he has informed us that he sends his regrets. He is chairing a negotiation session for the African group of negotiators. And so with that, I would like to introduce the Minister for Climate and Environment of the government of Sweden, Romina Pourmokhtari. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, dear friends, dear colleagues. First of all, let me thank the organizers of this very important event. The UN Framework Convention on Climate Change acknowledges that the global nature of climate change calls for the widest possible cooperation by all countries and their participation in an effective and appropriate international response. Through the UNFCCC, the Paris Agreement, the Agenda 2030 and the SDGs, and the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, we have a robust international framework for tackling climate change and delivering sustainable development. But we need to accelerate this implementation, and that, we believe, will require enhanced international cooperation in any way possible. Now, Sweden's message regarding the climate crisis is that urgency and opportunity needs to go hand in hand. So Sweden's message continues to be just that, urgency and opportunity. It needs to go hand in hand. And the climate transition is urgent, as we all know. It's a topic not least discussed here at the COP. But it also brings opportunities. It also brings opportunities in terms of the sustainable growth that the climate transition can bring. Given the right tools and right preconditions, the private sector can be the engine in the climate transition, resulting in innovation, investments, new jobs, and economic growth for all of those countries. And it is the role of the government to provide the right conditions in enabling the environment for this private sector and for all parties in our society to create that development of economic growth and taking care of the opportunities that come of the situation that we're in. Sweden fully believes in the urgency and opportunities of the climate transition. We have a climate policy framework since 2018, and this framework includes climate goals for 2030, 2040, and 2045, where we are to reach net zero, by the latest, to say. And we also look at having negative greenhouse or negative emissions after 2045. So this is the framework that we've adopted in the parliament, and all parties in the Swedish parliament stand behind the climate goal of reaching net zero by 2045. So we have a very united approach on tackling the climate crisis, and that is of the reasons I just mentioned. We are all starting to see the opportunities that come of climate transition. We have been able to invest and create the right conditions for our economy to thrive within the climate transition. And there are many reasons for this, and if I would go into telling the reasons behind creating this possibility where the economic growth comes out of transition, I would be here for way too long, so I will not go into that. But the matter of fact is that Sweden is quite a small country, and if we truly want to contribute to the Paris Agreement, we know that we need to look outside of our borders. We need to have further cooperation with other countries, and that will play a very important role both in meeting Sweden's own targets and in supporting the global transition. So climate finance will not alone be enough to reach the objectives of the Paris Agreement. We know this for many reasons. We are trying to mobilize more and more capital towards the climate finance. This is a discussion we have a lot, not least here at the COP. And Sweden is a big contributor and continues to be. But in this context, we see that it's not enough to reach the objectives. We have to do more. So in this context, we see that carbon markets has an important role to play in specifically mobilizing additional finance for climate mitigation efforts. And for that, Sweden is increasing our efforts to contribute to green transition in developing countries and mitigation of global emissions through the Article 6 framework. I am very proud of Sweden being one of the pioneers in Article 6 and thereby contributing to operationalizing Article 6 framework. We want to unlock the potential of carbon markets, and we want to increase the financial flows, both public and private, to climate action in developing countries. So very happy to be here today and to have been able to deliver these opening remarks. Unfortunately, we have to run off as well. As you all know, it's busy days right now, but hopefully it can result in progress, not only in the negotiations, but also by the opportunities that come of making contacts, meeting each other, and cooperating further around the world. So thank you so much, and good luck with the rest of the event.
Thank you very much, Minister. If I can try to summarize with just 3 points, I think what we heard is very important. The first one is that the private sector can be the engine of the clean energy transition, and the governments needs to create the enabling environment. Secondly, that the climate transition can be actually a business opportunity for the private sector as well. And third is that international cooperation is very, including for Article 6, through Article 6 is very important because it can accelerate the clean energy transition. With that, I was asked to provide a scene-setting presentation before moving to the panel session in order to provide a little bit of context, more context and insights to the far-reaching impact that Article 6 could have in the global energy transition. And for that, I would like to start us by looking at the broad picture of where we stand today in terms of global energy investments as of the latest analysis from the IEA. As you can see here in the pre-COVID world, investments in fossil fuels were slowly declining, and they were not. They were slowly declining from the beginning of the decade. But most importantly, if you look at the green bar there, investments in clean energy were stalling, and this is despite the Paris Agreement being adopted. As a result, the world was not investing enough in the energy sector, first to be aligned with the Paris Agreement, but also to meet the rising needs of the global demand in the energy sector. But then, as we all know, 2020 came with the COVID pandemic, and then the energy crisis that we are all still living in now. And for that, for fossil fuels, that meant there was an immediate slump in investment with an uncertain recovery. And as of today, in 2023, we are basically back to where we were prior to COVID, as you can see on this slide. But this also marked an important shift. So if we look at the investment in clean energy, clean energy investments are now seeing a double-digit annual growth, and $1 for every dollar that is invested in fossil fuels, now $1.7 are going into clean energy. This basically marks an important shift. The message is clear. That we have, the world is shifting in terms of investment. However, we need to analyze better the situation. We really need also to look further on where these investments are made. And the picture is that, unfortunately, these investments are a little bit uneven. So first, if we look at advanced economies and emerging and developing economies, we can see that more or less it's half and half, but this doesn't tell the whole picture. If we exclude China from the investments, we can see that investments in other emerging markets and developing economies are basically stalled in the last few years. And on top of, and we know that this needs to increase, and so these imbalances are a reason for concern. On top of that, we know that to meet the rising energy needs and also to align with the Paris Agreement, the annual investment in clean energy, especially in emerging market and developing economies, they need to more than triple by early 2030s. And this is one of the pillars, or the 5 pillars that the IEA is bringing to COP, hoping that it makes it into the final COP28 outcome. But importantly, if China is excluded from that, that increase is even steeper. From 2022 to 2030, to the earliest 2030s, we need to have an increase that is 7-fold in investment in clean energy, in clean energy in emerging market and developing economies. Again, this doesn't tell the whole picture because there is another big barrier, which is the one of the cost of capital. Especially for clean energy projects and especially for renewable energy projects. The cost of capital in emerging market and developing economies, as for our analysis, we show that in selected markets, it can be 2 to 3 times higher than in advanced economies. So for the same type of project, you would face basically an effective price that is more than double in emerging markets. Another important picture also to have another important graph to look at is where, as the minister was saying, where this finance needs to come from. As of today, more or less, we have half and half of private and public funding that are invested in clean energy in emerging market and developing economies. But of course, we all know, as we've seen before, that this needs to increase, but the increase is not even. In our scenarios, we model that around 60% of the increase will need to come from the private sector. And so there is an important question, which is how to mobilize the more private sector finance for emerging market and developing economies. And so in June this year, we highlighted, we tried to tackle this question in a report that we jointly released with the IFC, and I have, if I can make a self-promotion, copy here for those who are interested. And that report basically highlighted 4 main policy levers. The first one is to have policy reforms and strengthen institutional capacity. Of course, in interest of time, I'm not going to go into many details here. The second is to increase the rate of concessional finance. The third is to create new instruments and bring in more innovation. And in that space, we also included carbon markets, and we're going to delve into that a little bit more later. And then, of course, also deepen the local capital markets and financial systems in emerging market and developing economies. We know the carbon markets, despite, I think everyone knows about the controversy that is going, especially in the voluntary carbon markets nowadays. We have to recognize that they've established a quite unique and robust and reliable cross-border financial infrastructure that doesn't really increase the depth of the recipient countries, and also it's very efficient in challenging paying for performance funding to emerging market and developing economies. We try to tackle the question on how carbon markets can be effective for especially the African continent in another report that I also have here, that is Financing Clean Energy in Africa. We released that in September. And the rest of the presentation is going to be focused on the African opportunities in Africa in particular. So focusing on Africa, I mean, having seen the global figures, I think it doesn't come as a surprise to anyone that also in Africa, the investments, they need to rise substantially to 2030 for African countries to achieve goals such as universal energy access by 2030 and also successful implementation of their own NDCs. And as you can see, the increase is quite substantial. And as I was saying, part of that can be covered by potentially carbon markets, so channeling private finance through carbon markets to cover those energy needs. To understand better the situation of carbon markets in Africa, we looked at the history of of carbon markets in Africa. And what we can tell is that the experience has not been very even across the world, but in particular also in Africa. What I mean by that, what you can see here on the chart is the issuance of credits in the CDM, so the Clean Development Mechanism of the UN, by the biggest four issuer countries. Now, all 54 African countries combined, they issued around 3% of all CDM credits that were ever issued globally. But this, again, doesn't tell the whole picture. If we sort of magnify that 3%, we can see that 83% of those credits, of that 3%, comes only from 4 countries. And there is just one project in Egypt that issued around 30% of all the credits that were issued in Africa. So there is really an unbalance here, and clearly African countries have not had the chance to benefit from the Clean Development Mechanism so far. If we look at the voluntary carbon markets, I think everyone knows what they are in this room. If we look at the voluntary carbon markets, there is a relatively similar picture. Of course, forest credits, they couldn't be included under the CDM as we know it, especially in the second part. But in the whole voluntary carbon markets in the last 5-6 years, only 11% of the credits were issued in African countries, and of those, 65% were issued by just 5 countries once again. So again, it's a little bit imbalanced in terms of geographical representation. But most importantly, if we look also at the type of projects, there are 85% of all the credits, VCM credits in Africa, were coming from only 2 types of projects, as you can see on the screen. So one were forest project, and the second are from cookstove projects. And everything else is basically dwarfed by the other countries. And this is the historical situation. But now if we look at the outlook, we only looked at the Article 6 because we think that modeling at the moment voluntary carbon markets is a little bit complicated. And we think that there is an important opportunities for African countries to benefit from this new engagement and voluntary cooperation at the international level. 42 African countries have expressed interest in their NDCs, in their latest submissions to engage in Article 6 cooperation, and most of them they see themselves, of course, as sellers of credits. But what's important, we work with the university to model the potential financial flow and also the net mitigation potential, not only in the energy sector, this is comprising all sectors, and the revenues of carbon markets, carbon credits sell through Article 6 could actually cover 20% of the financial needs required for clean energy investments in Africa by 2030 and 30% by 2050. And this basically it's quite significant because it also includes goals such as fulfilling all the SDG 7 and also fulfilling all the NDCs. So we know that there are at the moment also some flows in the markets and the rules are still negotiated, but we really think that there is quite a lot of potential to be explored there. And again, the revenues from Article 6 could be reinvested by the countries in clean energy to foster the clean energy transitions in Africa. With that, I think I will pause it there. And I would like to invite the panelists to please take a seat directly on the stage. I think we have a very full panel, so I'm not going to be able to sit there. I'm going to stand for the next hour. But we have really, we're privileged to have 6 world-class expert panelists with us today. I'm going to introduce as they sit. So we have Fenella Aouan, who is the head of carbon pricing, and she's the deputy director of the Global Green Growth Institute, GGGI. We have Henrik Tenger, who is the head of strategy and sustainability at AFRI, a Swedish company. Then we have Kari Hämekoski, who is the senior program manager at Nefco. Molly Brown, who is the head of carbon strategy at Bird Manufacturing in Kenya. And then Nawa Dhakal, who is the executive director of Alternative Energy Promotion Center at AEPC in Nepal. And then, last but not least, certainly Sandra Lindström, who is the head of International Climate Cooperation of the Swedish Energy Agency. So please, first of all, let's join me in welcome the whole panel with us. I would like to start perhaps asking a few questions to the whole panel. I will ask one question one by one, but I would like also to invite you to make some reflection to and reaction to what you heard in my presentation, and also from the minister before. I would like to welcome first our speaker from Nepal to ask you about AEPC vision that is to bring alternative energy solutions to Nepal, and how do you see carbon markets can help you to fulfill this vision? And also, how do you think they could be important as a sort of finance? Yes.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for this opportunity to be in the panel today. It has been towards the end of COP. There are a lot of things going on, and as we saw from the background presentation, that the goals that are set under the NDCs, or the goals that we need to meet towards 1.5 degree are really tall, and we really need to work hard, and the investments or the mobilizing finance is going to be the key. With this, I'll come to the question. Alternative Energy Promotion Center is the government of Nepal's focal agency on renewable energy and energy efficiency. Basically, we have been working as the government's agency to bring modern energy access to the rural population in Nepal, basically through micro, mini hydro, solar, wind, and bioenergy solutions. Likewise, we are also promoting electric cooking, biogas, and improved cook stoves as a part of clean cooking solutions, and also powering the micro, small, and medium enterprises for rural businesses, and powering the health, education, agriculture, and services. In the energy efficiency space, we have been working very recently only. This is a new mandate given to us. And in this area, raising the awareness, working with the relevant partners to build a conducive policy and strategy framework, and identifying the opportunity areas in the energy efficiency to get the high value of the sector is something we are currently focusing on. We are the developer of carbon projects under the Kyoto mechanism. We have 8 carbon projects developed under CDM. And currently, because of our experience under CDM also, we are very keen to enter into the arena of Article 6. So we are looking at both 6.2 and 6.4 to develop the projects. And if we see Nepal's NDC, the Nepal's NDC has identified 4 mitigation areas, namely energy, industrial process and product use, agriculture, forestry, and land use, and the waste. In all 4 sectors, energy plays a key role. Energy itself has a generation, transport, and clean cooking as a subsectors. In the industry also, there is a very high potential for energy efficiency and energy transition. In the agriculture sector also, there is a potential to transition, especially in terms of water pumping and agriculture mechanization. In the waste sector, the waste to energy. So that's why energy is very much central to meeting the mitigation goals that our NDC has set. And the Nepal's long-term strategy for net zero emissions by 2045 is also in line with what the goals have been set under NDC. And it has even elaborated, especially in the energy transition part. So energy transition is not only in the industry, but in the household, commercial sector, the transport sector, agriculture sector, and the service sector. So this is how we are well posed to really play a good role in terms of developing carbon projects under Article 6 mechanisms. And we are very keen to partner with the relevant partners. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these remarks. I would like now to turn to Sandra, if possible. And we know that Sweden and the Swedish Energy Agency are early movers in the Article 6 space. And so I would like to ask you, what have you found to be the biggest challenges to get the market up and running? And if you could say a few words, if these challenges are already solved, and how you're approaching this, and what type of barrier remains?
Thank you, Luca, for that question. And maybe before answering that question, I just want to reflect a little bit on the positive side, because I have been asked this question in a number of panels through the past days. And when you answer that question, you of course tend to focus on what is broken and what needs to be fixed. And so the last few years, I think we have seen a tremendous growth in interest of the carbon market, which I think is good, because I really believe that there's a potential for countries and for companies to engage. And also, I think what we have seen is that there is, there is a common understanding by the whole carbon market community that we need to get this right. We have learned from the past, from the failures and from the weakness of CDM, and I think everyone wants to get this right from start. So I think that's a really good news to see that development is here, but also last year, and basically since the rules were approved in Glasgow. So to your question, Luca, with regards to what the challenges are, well, I think one of the challenges is that we have a quite fragmented market today in terms of the carbon market. We have many carbon markets around the world in different regions, which is good. I think the challenge is that they all operate with different rules, different regulations, and with different standards. And so it's difficult for businesses, but also for countries, both buyer countries and seller countries, to understand how do we engage, because the rules in the playing field are different. And I think it's important to harmonize it a little bit, well, to harmonize it so that the actors can feel that they are getting a fair deal when they engage. So that I think that's one. Another one is that we don't have market liquidity yet. We don't have enough sellers, we don't have enough buyers, both countries and companies. And if we want market liquidity, then we need to have more participants coming into the market. And a third one that I would like to bring is also there is still a price uncertainty. It's difficult for project developers, businesses, to understand how are the programs priced. And that is, of course, an important component if you are going to develop a project. And it's also difficult for us as a country, as a buyer, to to understand how do we price a program, because there's no market prices to have a reference on. And just finally, what I want also to bring is that many countries are still developing their frameworks in terms of Article 6. So countries are starting to develop their regulations, appoint entities to be responsible for the Article 6, and without these, then it's difficult for the other partners to engage, because then you don't really know how it works. But the good news, I just want to end my intervention here with the good news, is that many countries are working on this. I hope that next year when we see each other again, that we have more positive developments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandra. You mentioned a lot of points that I would like to return upon to later on in the discussion, especially in the fragmentation of the markets, the market liquidity, and also the price uncertainty. So thanks very much for doing that. I would like to turn now to Fenella, if that's okay. GGGI is an intergovernmental organization, but you're tasked to facilitate the trading of international transfer mitigation outcomes and carbon markets in general. And so I would be very keen to hear what, similar to what Sandra was saying, what you have experienced on the ground when with your member countries, what you're hearing are the biggest opportunities and the biggest challenges by doing this.
Thank you, Luca. Thanks very much. Yes, for those of you who are not so aware of GGGI, just that we are a member organisation as an intergovernmental organisation. So we don't deal with every country in the world. We only deal with our members, of which we have about 48. They tend to be the ones that are quite keen on green, hence their keenness to become members of our organisation. So what are we hearing and seeing? Everyone wants to get involved in Article 6. They're all very, very keen. They're all asking for help. They don't know how to start. The political will is there. Some are front runners. There was a session yesterday that I moderated where we see some very forward-thinking countries, Ghana, Thailand, some others. But generally, they need something in order to help them understand the market, feel they can trust the markets, feel that it is in the interest of their country to enter markets. I think why enter the markets is often a clear phrase. What's how does it work? And we view it, we're there to help our members with green growth. And how do you get green growth? Well, you can write reports till you're blue in the face, but really what you need is finance and implementation. So to get finance, the traditional route has been, well, you go and look at concessional finance from the GCF or from MDBs or from others, and then you try and help that. Climate finance can be slow, though. So we view, as a technical assistance organisation, that carbon finance, the commodity trading of carbon, can work in parallel to climate finance. So the idea is you're able to use both, and therefore you can accelerate your action on the ground in green growth in all the sectors. So this is very key for energy and other sectors. So what do you need to get going once you've got the political will? If I just give you a very brief list of what's needed, and then I can tell you what we have done. First of all, you need some form of legislation. You need something that tells everybody in the country who is responsible and who is mandated to trade. So this is normally, the Ministry of Environment under a climate law is mandated to manage and regulate carbon trading. Then you need to look at much more detail around the processes and procedures, the ever-changing, if we look at B1 now, of what you need to put in an initial report or what you need for an authorization, a transfer, whatever it is, But somebody has to have a manual to be able to go, right, I need to fill in this form by this date and submit it to this place, and they will tell me yes, no, whatever. That process is not functional and not useful if somebody outside the country simply writes a manual and goes, here's how you do it, just do it like that, because every country is different and every government is different. So you need to sit with the government. It needs to be their operational manual. So we use something we call decision support, which is you could authorize at this point, that point, that point. These are the implications. If you do 1, 2, or 3, you decide which one you want to do. So by the end of it, hopefully you have an operation manual that the country has effectively written. Then you need to identify what is it that you could trade. So you have an NDC. Countries sometimes have a list of priority activities under that NDC, sometimes don't. So what are the activities that are going to be done under the NDC, and what activities are above and beyond the NDC that could be eligible for carbon trading? And do you even have your whole economy under your NDC? Because I just earlier saw a gentleman who is desperately keen to do soil carbon in a country that doesn't even have AFLU under its NDC. So it's not going to be reasonable to expect them to apply a corresponding adjustment to that. Transaction support. There are lots of countries being shown MOUs, bilateral agreements, trade with us, just do this. They go, I don't know, what is the implication of this? They don't know what it means, and they're saying, help us understand what the implications are of all these agreements. Should we sign these? And it's, well, be careful, because you need to make sure that you have the following structures in place, because they're saying, if we approve a deal underneath this MOU, you will apply a corresponding adjustment, but you haven't got the systems to do that yet. And then finally, and I think it was already mentioned by Sandra, trade negotiations. What is a fair price? Where should I be looking at for a price? What are the different markets? Is voluntary different from Article 6? I think we'll elaborate a little bit more on that later. So what's been done? And we do need to talk about what's been done, not just about what we are going to do. If I reference my earlier conversation walking in here with Ingo, what has been done? And we've progressed an awful lot on that first space. That first space, I'm sure you will have all heard several times, capacity building. We need capacity building. We need to understand. We need the knowledge. So I don't care to mention how many events and sessions and learnings and everything we've participated in, but certainly Nawa's nodding there. With Nepal, we've done some intense work around MOPA training. What's the contract look like? And explanations of Article 6 with multiple ministries. But so it doesn't look like a trade, but it's certainly the first bedrock of where we start for countries to understand what they're getting into. We're working in around 12 to 15 countries at the moment. Where do I think that's going to go over the coming period? I reckon we could probably say we'll be tripling that number within the next year. I really feel this market is now on the cusp of multiplying. So I note your earlier comment, Luca, about Africa getting left behind last time. I think that's really important to make sure that there is sufficient funding for all this technical assistance so that it reaches everybody. And I'm glad to say we are working in multiple African countries. And beyond that, you can see decrees being worked on in several countries, guidelines being issued for the governance framework in Zambia, projects, design documents being completed. There are plenty of things being done, MOUs being signed in over 4 countries, and that's just what we've done. Others are at authorization, almost at transfer. There's great progress. Thanks.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Fenella, for these reflections. There is a lot to unpack there, but it's very comprehensive. I think What I retain is legislation is important, national legislation processes as well, but they need to be national determined, especially authorization, and also, again, the price discovery, what we have discussed before with Sandra. But now I would like to, actually, if I may, have a combined question, and I would like now to bring in the implementers here, so Molly for Bern, but also Kari from Nefco. And you have a lot of experience in implementing projects on the ground, and often these are with the poorest communities, especially in Africa, especially for the case of Bern. And this could be for enabling access through clean cooking or enhanced cooking solutions, also solar energy solutions. So with the new rules of Article 6, what has changed in practice for you and also for the governments that you're working with? And what do you see as the main barriers to uptake further engagement on this? So perhaps I will start with Kari and then move into Molly. And again, if you want also to comment on the scene setting presentation and the minister remarks, feel free to do so.
Okay, thank you very much. I definitely agree everything was said before, but let me reflect some more general points first. So first of all, Nefco is a Nordic green bank, so we only do environmental projects. And we used to have a big role in the Kyoto markets, and now we are exploring also with Nordic colleagues Article 6. And especially relevant for this forum that we have some major programs in Africa, beyond the grid fund for Africa for energy access and modern cooking facility for cooking solutions. These are sort of beyond cook stoves, beyond charcoal, like a very high level. And I guess Molly will address those in a more detailed. But let me reflect some historical reflections maybe. I mean, we definitely need all the instruments and frameworks, and we need to emphasize that mechanisms are always like supplemental. They don't replace emission reductions, and that's sometimes misunderstood. That's key detail. They're cost effective. We can do much more if you utilize markets, much more mitigation, and also adaptation. And private sector is needed. And if you look at what happened on the Kyoto Protocol, basically, there were quite a few pioneers, governments, World Bank, Dutch government, even Finnish government. Sweden was even earlier active, well before Kyoto Protocol. So we need those pioneers. We need these, Sweden, Switzerland's, Ghana's, Thailand's to really pave the way and pilot. And what happened on the Kyoto Protocol after this kind of sort of piloting phase, governments played and World Banks playing a major role. Then the private sector took off. There was EU demand, and then sort of exploded, the whole CDM market exploded. And I'm also a bit concerned about that there's a bit of negative reputation for CDM, which I fully don't agree. Of course, we need to make sure that we make everything right. But we have all this experience now that we can really learn and go for co-benefits, net mitigation, and so on. So those are sort of my key points. And what concretely we are now dealing with is something called Modern Cooking Facility for Africa. We are supporting private companies, funding coming from Sweden, Norway, and EU. It's a reverse auction. We provide small incentive, but the companies need additional financing, co-financing, and carbon finance is like, as we heard today, could be like a perfect source for the needed additional financing in Africa. There are only few players, and we have a major challenge for cooking solutions in Africa. And there we are not directly involved as a Nefco, but we support the companies, and we provide technical assistance to companies. And I'm sure Molly will go into details what actually happens on the ground. Thank you.
Thanks, yes, and thanks for Hello. My name's Molly. I work for Bern. We are Africa's largest clean cooking company, based out of Kenya. And I think what's exciting about cook stoves is that it's a real opportunity for energy transition on the household level. And I think when we talk about energy transition, often we're thinking about wind farms, we're thinking about solar, we're thinking about hydrogen, but actually 2.5 billion people still cook every day on an open fire. And you know, cooking on a campfire is fun 2 or 3 times a year. Having a barbecue is fun. It's not very fun if it's every single day, and it's not very fun if you have limited access to expensive wood. You have to travel far to collect it. So what we're trying to do at Burn is help people transition initially from very inefficient cooking methods, so literally 3 stones and a fire on the floor, to proper highly engineered, thermally efficient cook stoves. But most excitingly, in the last couple of years, we've been piloting electric cook stoves in Africa, for Africa. And with the support of Nefco earlier this year at Africa Climate Summit, we were able to announce that we're now scaling those electric cook stoves across 6 African countries, which is very exciting, and really presents an amazing opportunity for fuel transition on the kind of household level, if we can switch people from cooking with charcoal to cooking with electric. The problem, of course, is that the people that we're talking about are families who don't have the money to pay for expensive cooking equipment. We've done a lot of piloting and testing and trying to bring the costs down, but our induction cooker with 3 pots retails for about $120. And we're talking about families who are living on $1, $2, $5 a day. They can't afford it, right? So what we have to try and do at Burn is work out how you can get expensive, really high quality cook stoves to the hands of low-income families. And what's been very exciting about the Nefco partnership is that that's allowing us to do just that. But the wider Article 6 opportunity, I think, is very exciting for us, because with carbon we can provide a proper subsidy on the upfront cost of the stove, reducing it by about $40 for the electric stoves and $20 to $30 for the biomass stoves. That means that every single family gets a massive discount on day one to their stove, and that's repaid gradually through carbon. What we've seen since the CDM ended is that the market has been kind of left in this limbo state. We don't have Article 6 yet. They're still negotiating hard. Hopefully something happens in the next couple of days. And we don't have the CDM either. So we're sort of stuck in the middle with the voluntary carbon markets. And they've been a useful and interesting tool, but as lots of people in this room will know, they've also been quite unpredictable, quite shaky and volatile. And what we see as a really exciting opportunity now is moving forwards as we're looking to the energy transition and the kind of next 7 years up to 2030 is more stable contracting, more stable partnerships between private sector as a kind of deliverer and enabler, and then host country governments, and then buyer governments or buyer companies in the probably the global north. And those more stable partnerships can unlock really like investment at scale, more stable investment, and more certainty in terms of really being able to direct funding ultimately into the hands of households all across the subcontinent, sub-Saharan Africa, the continent.
Thank you very much to both of you, Mali and Kari. These are really relevant thoughts to think further, and there are a couple of points that I would like, again, to us to retain for later. I like when you talk about the business model on how this works, Mali, in terms of, for instance, innovation. We've seen innovation in financing mechanism is also something that we are recommending as well. And I noted down, you mentioned the VCM as unpredictable, shaky, and volatile. And I think this, I'm not going to quote you, but I think it really gives a very good picture of where we stand at the moment with the fragmentation that also Sandra mentioned before. And I would like to come back to that later on also about the causes that are on this. But I would like to thank Henrik for your patient. We've been making you wait a little bit long, but I would like to ask, so for AFRI, what are your current, as a private company, what are your current climate aims in terms of private sector organization? How do you see carbon markets being part of the solution to assist with net zero transition?
Thank you very much, and no problem about the waiting. I think it's a very good question, and I think that more and more companies, I think, are doing like us. So we have now set net zero targets. We're part of the Exponential Roadmap Initiative. We want to rely very much on science. We have set targets that are approved now by Science-Based Targets Initiative, where we will have our emissions until 2030 and be net zero then by 2040. I think that for us the first step is absolutely to look at our own emissions before we look at how to handle any residual with carbon markets and offsets one way or another. But for us that is really key priority number one, and I think that is maybe from a company perspective then the main thing for consideration when you talk about carbon markets, that you don't use it as an excuse not to work with your own emissions. However good the alternative is, you need to work with your own emissions. I think that the other aspect that we have as a company is that we work on our own emissions with the science-based targets, as I said. But we are an engineering company. We help design and build energy plants, we build transmission lines, we build pulp and paper factories, we build different bioindustry, we build roads and rails. So we have much more impact in the downstream in the value chain than we have in our own operations. So therefore, it's also not only to look at the current emissions, but it's important to look at the strategy that we have. And our strategy is clearly to move more and more into the green energy transition, the green industrial transition that also follows from that, and all of the bioindustries, circularity, etc. So that sector is now about 40% of our business. It's our fastest growing part of our business, and it's actually also our most profitable part of our business. So I think that it's a little bit multifaceted question. So one is really to look at the emissions, but it's also to look a little bit more strategically outside of just looking at the current emissions. And with that said, I think carbon markets are then interested in two aspects. So one is, of course, how do we in the end offset any residual emissions that we have? But it is also then in line with what you were talking of here from Nefco, for example, how can we finance some of the projects that we do together with our clients? So I think those are, from our perspective, two really interesting perspectives. And to be honest, I mean, you touched on that, the voluntary carbon markets, and that there is a bit of, I would say, hesitance, I think, amongst us and many other companies against carbon markets, because they have a little bit bad reputations for a number of issues that I'm sure all of you have seen them. So with that, I'm very positive to if Article 6 can now be implemented in a good way. Then I think it can really be a driver for us and others to make sure that we invest in the most efficient ways for mitigating the carbon emissions. If we fail, we will have climate colonialism. We will have ways where companies are patting themselves on the back and thinking they did a good job, but in the end we actually didn't achieve the carbon emission reductions. So I think that the implementation, I know we're talking a lot about it, but that to me is really crucial that we get that right. So from company perspective, a little bit of hesitance. We have a lot of expectations, both on how we can work on projects and how we can work on it for ourselves. But we need to get it right, because I consider myself then above average interested and probably knowledgeable about carbon markets, but also for me it's very complicated to understand how to get it right.
Thanks, and you're not definitely the only one who finds it complicated. But thanks for these thoughts, and I would like to actually to pick up one thing that you mentioned about this hesitant and the that comes from the reputation of markets. We all know about the recent scandals that have touched the voluntary carbon markets, and I think there could be a potential risk also for Article 6 to be contaminated with this risk, or at least there might be a bias for certain actors to think that carbon markets can be really effective and solutions. So what I would like to ask to the whole panel, what do you think is needed to bring trust in the market? We hear often about high integrity of carbon markets. There are different definitions, and I would like to hear yours from the different perspectives. We have really a rich panel here, so it would be interesting. And to do that, may I ask, we go in order so that Andrén doesn't wait too much, starting from Fenella and until Sandra, please.
So thank you, Luca, and I'm actually really glad you asked that question. High integrity, to me personally, rather than, first of all, before I speak to GGGI's more formal point of view, is whatever it takes to make Henrik come into the market. Yeah. It's what's going to get rid of the fear. Now, you can think of any manner and number of things to do that, and if I talk from a GGGI point of view, I will talk about Paris alignment, I would talk about robust baselines, I would talk about good MRV. Yeah, but you know what? I'm a trader. So let's just say something that can robustly prove that you're doing something that you weren't doing before, that needs the money, will create transformational change, and will be sustainable. And if we can get that, there are lots of different ways and rules to do it. But that, I feel, is a pretty good start.
Yeah, that sounds like a good start. And I think that, I mean, we work with a number of clients who are really advanced and who really are now already in the markets. And they spend quite a lot of time evaluating then each project by itself, and it takes a lot of effort. So I think we need to get a more standardized recognition that if those criteria are fulfilled, this is a good project. Ideally, we would also have an independent party or sufficiently independent party that could verify, so that I as a company don't have to go myself and verify that this is sufficiently good. Because then I think we can get into much more of a market thinking, because as a company, we're very much in favor of a carbon price. And if we have a carbon price that is getting more and more global, at least, and then we have also price for these projects, then it's quite easy to combine them, and it's quite easy for us to make a decision. So the more we standardize, the more we can actually get the price and set the price, as we talked about before, and then I think many more of us would get into the market.
Okay, I guess one challenge that sometimes there are so different projects, and in media things get confused, and there are some prototypes which are, let's say, more secure, that we should make a difference here to some extent. But having said that, I mean, we need to make sure that the whole market is we need to really have a very solid market, that's it. But coming back to our cooking solutions, one thing that we will be supporting and testing is kind of this actual stove use monitoring. I mean, for our sort of example, where we actually can see exactly how much stove have been used. It's not anymore based on like a sampling or something like this. So we need to improve the monitoring part of the project, and that's one of our examples that could help integrity of the market.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. I also think there's a lot of very smart people, many of them here in Dubai this week, with a lot of organisations and a lot of acronyms. And I think we will get there. It's about trust. It's also about all the kind of long list of integrity points that I think we have consensus around, which is very exciting. But I think it's also about the co-benefits, the sort of wider picture, right? Like, we need to make sure that if we're spending money on cook stoves, that we're spending money on cook stoves that are really good, really high quality. We need to make sure there's tangible gender benefits, that there's health benefits. What's exciting, as you were just saying, is that our electric stoves each have an IoT sensor inside them, so we really get real live feeds of people's usage rates, which the kind of digital element is really helping with that side of things. But I think the more human picture as well, the co-benefits, the other SDGs, is super important in terms of integrity.
Thank you. Actually, it has been well covered. If I may add, especially with the environmental integrity, what I would like to emphasize is the value or the commitment that we have made to protect the environment, to protect the climate. That must be ensured. It must be measurable. It must be really, verifiable. So that's what the processes also mention. That's why we do this monitoring, verification, and reporting. So this value must be protected, and we really need to show the honesty with what we have been doing and what we have been claiming. Thank you.
Yeah. So what do we mean by high integrity carbon credits? Before we used to speak about environmental integrity simply. And then now with all the scandals and the criticism, we're now talking about high integrity carbon credits. And that is good, because that means that the market wants to move on the positive direction. On the negative side, it means really that there are low integrity carbon credits. And I really hope that in the future we will only be talking about carbon credits, because I really think that that's a basic requirement that the market should demand, that all carbon credits should have high integrity. So going back to your question, Luca, so what does it mean? And just want to reflect, because this is also a question that we are asked by many, especially at home. And one reflection is that it's difficult to prove what would have happened otherwise. So once you enter into an agreement with a project, you of course have to prove that, okay, this is additional, meaning that this would not have happened if the money wouldn't have come to the program. But 5 years later, when that program happened, it's difficult to say that what would have happened if the money didn't come. So that's one reflection. But in general, what it really means is that high sustainable development. So beside the emission reductions that the program has to result on, the program also, I think, should result on other sustainable development aspects: no poverty, energy for all, and job opportunities, and so on. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the six of you. This was very rich as well. If I just perhaps try to paraphrase, what I heard is we need to bring back trust in the markets, and on two things. One is what Sandra was mentioning, so that the integrity, the high integrity, is not anymore related to the credits, that we have the certainty that one credit corresponds to 1 ton of CO2 that is removed or reduced. And then the co-benefits are also something that we definitely need to take into account, because these projects are not only an accounting exercise, we're bringing transformation in the countries where these are implemented. And so we really need to take a more holistic picture. We have around 20 minutes left. Before, I have plenty of questions to the panelists, but before asking further questions, I would like to give the opportunity to the audience to see if anyone has questions. To please raise your hand and we'll give you the floor. Please. And if you can please introduce yourself.
Jonathan McGilvery with Resilient LLP. We're a climate and energy law firm based in Toronto. Molly, you mentioned the challenges in the negotiations currently and the fact that we're still in the process of negotiating Article 6. But we've got a lot of it. We've got the Paris Agreement, we've got the Glasgow decisions, which are fairly robust, and we have some clarifications from Sharm. It's unclear what we'll get out of Dubai. My question is, and I guess it's for all panelists, is there the ability to begin implementing now? Can we take advantage of Article 6 now and stop waiting? And I'll maybe just leave it at that, nice and simple.
Thank you very much for the question. Before turning to the panel, I want to see maybe collect another question if there is. We have a hand here. Please introduce yourself. Thanks.
Hello there, it's Irene from BP. I have a question about how host countries think about exporting credits and how they consider the sale of a correspondingly adjusted credit. Obviously, they've got to then make up for that sold credit within their own NDC. So just interested to hear your thoughts on the kind of cost-benefit analysis and trade-off of sale versus the investment that they'll attract. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's give it a minute. Let's see if there is any other hand. I don't see. Yeah. Let's go there and then we come to you in the next round. Sorry.
Hi, that's Pedro from Micro Securities. My question is about pricing connected with corresponding adjustment. I mean, we have the Clay Foundation. I think they mentioned about closing the finance gap. They release prices. It's very public. We have the report that was published by Perspectives and Climate Focus, also putting a lot of prices on ITMOs. But then, I mean, we also have the reports from the World Bank proposing like the cost of opportunity. So I'd like just to hear from the streets, what's your approach to that, or maybe what you think, how to close this finance gap, or better saying, whether ITMOs would be closing the finance gap or bridging the whole finance gap, so to say. So I'll stop here.
Thank you, Pedro. So we have three questions. The first one on Article 6 implementation, the second on export credits and cost-benefit analysis, and the third on pricing. I would like to ask the panel, each of you, feel free to answer the questions that you want. This time I would like to start from Sandra, if that's okay for you, Sandra, and then we move towards Vanella. Please.
Thank you. Yeah, I think there was a question with regards to the pricing, and it's really difficult to answer that question. We don't have that many projects yet as a reference to how projects are priced. The way we have approached this is to look into the marginal cost for conducting or for implementing the program. And also, simply, it is a negotiation between the buyer and the seller. What we typically look into is to bridge in order to make it happen. So we look into what is the financing gap. Is it acceptable to us to carry the full financial gap? And if not, we need to look into other solutions in order to make it happen. So I'm afraid that I don't have any more details to that question, but yeah, so that's how we have done it as far as now.
Thank you. I think if I may add to what Sandra had just mentioned on pricing, I think we shouldn't just look from the point of view of, the implementation cost. It's definitely beyond. The countries where this credits will be generated and traded to the countries who can buy the credits. I think the country context, the vulnerability, and the sustainable development benefits the project will bring, and Sandra also mentioned in the absence of that financing, what would happen. So all these things need to be considered. So just considering the implementation cost will definitely not be enough. And regarding exporting credits or corresponding adjustments, I think in Nepal's case, we are definitely ready for that, and I do have an opinion that every country has the goals set by NDC, and based on that, we understand that if something is given to somebody else, then we need to deduct from ours. So I think that there should be a fairly robust and transparent mechanism so that everyone knows how much has been produced and how much has been transferred to his country or which party, and then this needs to be fairly treated in a very transparent manner. That is the point I would like to say. And on the first question, the possibility of implementation starting right now, I think it's a very high time, because as we have been hearing that the 1.5 degree is the goal and 1.1 has already happened, so we must make our best efforts to finalize the negotiations and start the implementation right now. We do not need to delay. Any delays is going to hamper all of us, hamper the globe, hamper the climate. Yeah, that's why we need to really take it as a very highly urgent matter. Thank you.
Yes, I completely agree. As our colleague from Vancouver has rightly pointed out, it's been 8 years since Paris, so hopefully we can get started on Article 6 as soon as possible. I think the difficulty to the question over there for the host country governments is trying to work out what the right pricing is that's fair and what the right fair share is. We work in 10 African countries, so we've been following very closely the different phases of negotiation and making of frameworks in lots of different countries, and there is still an open question. Should it be a fixed fee like Ghana's done? Should it be a percentage fee like the Tanzanians have gone for? Should it be done through a community benefit fund, which is what Kenya was aiming for, but that may now change? There's lots of different models of doing it, and if you're the first, then you're the first and you set a standard, and everyone's very excited that Ghana has such a well thought through framework and a really skilled team in the Carbon Markets Office. So there's a lot of excitement at the moment about doing stuff in Ghana, which is great. Well done, Ghana. But there are a lot of other countries in the world, and we need to get to a point where everybody's participating and the market's working properly across all countries. But to the pricing point, Pedro, it's quite difficult to know, again, what the real price should be. Is it based on supply and demand? Is it based on cost? High integrity projects cost more, surprising no one. Yes, I think hopefully that should settle down. But it's a bit of a shot in the dark at the moment. And in the Article 6 bilateral context, it's very much negotiated between the project developer and the country.
Yeah, thank you. In our case, we leave that to the companies. But for those companies we support, we have a fairly strict clauses in agreement where we have sort of a possibility to intervene. We want to see that any carbon deals are too high integrated, so we have specific clauses that we can accept, like a voluntary carbon markets. Of course, we would like to see Article 6 in the future, and we want to know how carbon finance affects the projects. So we need to be fully informed what happens in the projects.
Yeah, thank you. A lot of good things. Can we start implementation? I think the answer is yes. I think Swedish Energy Agency is, for example, already doing that. So I think there are examples that it is happening. So very good that is happening. And for us as a company, I'm also very happy that the government takes this initiative, because I think for us as a company it's much harder. And as a company, of course, if the Swedish Energy Agency says that something is a good project to invest in, I would be quite inclined to believe that. I think when it comes to the export of credits and what the host countries think about that, okay, I am, as a company, I'm quite concerned about that and how we will be seen as potentially doing investments in a foreign country for not the right reasons. And even if we are agreeing today that it's a great idea, are we still agreeing in 5-10 years that it is a great idea when the host country realizes that they have actually sold a lot of credits and now they need to recover that somehow. Are we sure in the long run also that it is good? So this is a, how should I say, concern for a company. Are we doing the right things? For pricing, I understand in the beginning that there are lots of different ways of setting a price. But I think as a company, I will of course looking for the most reduction for the lowest price. And I think that's where we need to get more of a market going forward. And I think that is also the intention, that we should find the most cost-efficient way to achieve the CO2 reductions. So hopefully that is in line with the Article 6, but I think this needs to somehow get into a market price or a more common price.
Thank you. Too resilient. Yes, come on, don't be silly. Of course you can trade now. I mean, we traded under the CDM with 34,000 square brackets in every ERPA. So, you know, if that is what they decide in the negotiations, then that happens. And if it doesn't, we do that. And then over time. And we better hurry up and get on with it, because otherwise they're just going to carry on in B1 forever. The way you stop the negotiations is you say, see, don't need any more, we're doing it. Clearly, I'm being a little obtuse. There are always many points that need to be deeply negotiated in the finer detail, but yes, you can of course trade now. Glasgow set the rule book. We're just tidying up the loose ends at the moment, and if you want to speak to Ingo afterwards, who's at South Pole at the back of the room, you can prove that trades are happening already. Regarding are countries ready because they'll have to, I'm sorry, was the company name Ping? BP, right. So if the countries will have to make it back, no. If it's above and beyond their unconditional NDC commitments, they've only committed to meet their unconditional NDC. So as long as you're not doing anything that's in there, then they don't have to make it back. So it's quite an important point, because there are two schools of thought here. One school of thought is trade anything, including what's in the unconditional NDC, but pay an opportunity cost. In other words, pay a compensation amount for a country to make it back. Or only look at things that are above the country's commitments. So that's clearly something for a private sector buyer. Now another thing that they have to then look at, so just rely on the Swedish Energy Agency to tell you that it's okay. Regarding price, the point was on price as to how's it going to develop. Okay, it's interesting. From a pure trader's point of view, everyone's seeking a market price. It's like waiting for Godot. We are creating the market, so there isn't a market price until we've created it. So we have to now say, do we work on the cost of implementation, so taking Sandra's comments there, possibly plus a premium because I'm worth it, as Nawa is saying, or, well, there might be other places where you can do it better, like Molly's maybe added. Who knows? It's where someone wants to sell and where someone wants to buy, and where Henrik feels there's value. So that's it. And then when we have a base and we have a number of prices spread over the place, then you'll find a market price.
Thank you very much. Lots of thoughts once again, thanks. This was very rich. I think we have 10 minutes left. We might have space for 2 questions. If the gentleman over there had already raised a hand, and then back there, and maybe a 3rd question here, and then we close. Over there. And again, please, if you can kindly introduce yourself.
Thank you. I'm Tusita from Government of Sri Lanka. Presently, we are developing our the carbon market policy as well as regulatory system. I'm just wondering whether we are too early to do that or too late. You know, what's the situation? Like, we are struggling to understand, you know, the real meaning of this carbon, you know, this Article 6 and so on. So we are struggling to fit into our system. So what do you think? Like, what's your recommendation? Whether we we have to go ahead, or like we have to wait for, this COP28, or what's the situation? Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Bruna from Brazil. And it's just a quick question on, as you mentioned, countries will need to do the corresponding adjustments if the project was related to something that was inside their NDC. So how do the Article 6 does not incentivize countries not to cover lots of sectors in their NDCs and instead just set a NDC target covering, for example, buildings and transportation, but not power sector or land use, etc. So how do we deal with this? Did I make myself clear?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
And then we had the final question here. Yeah.
Good afternoon, Ahmed Hanafi with the Canadian delegation. So this question came up in different forms, but I'd like to get your thoughts on how do we make sure, what guardrails do we put forward to make sure there's no double counting of emission reduction. This is the $1 million question that I think we just need to be honest about. We talked about incrementality, we talked about the NDC contributions, but the risk of double counting and just resulting in a system that is effectively just, not contributing to incremental emission reductions is quite high. And I'm curious if you have thoughts on what guardrails we need to be putting in, whether in COP negotiations, in the individual NDCs, and in our national plans to make sure that those emissions are real, tangible emission reductions. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We have very limited time, so I will ask all the panelists to please stick to 1-2 minutes, and you can pick perhaps one of the questions. I assume that the last question you mean between non-corresponding adjusted, how do you avoid double counting? So please, perhaps this time we start from Fenella until Sandra.
Just remind me of the
please.
first.
Yes, the 3 questions. So whether to go ahead for the best possible system or to start trading already, then perverse incentive, whether the scope of the NDC, what happens when the scope of NDC is not comprehensive, and then how to avoid double counting.
Okay, very quickly to Sri Lanka. Well, I'm looking forward to visiting Colombo to do some capacity building for you. I think we're about to, from GGGI, so tell Dr. Jasinga we're on our way. But no, you shouldn't trade if you haven't got any policies in place, because the buyer is going to say on what authority and under what legal structure are you selling. Do you need to wait for COP28? No, refer back to the question earlier from Resilient. No, you can trade now, but you do need to be very clear. The Sri Lankan government needs to be clear and happy that they understand what they are selling. A country should never sell something that it doesn't understand. On the question of NDC, I tend to look at it the other way around. I tend to look at it like the soil carbon guy that came and saw us and said, and I said, well, the country's NDC that you're trying to go there doesn't cover it. So you can't trade because you can't do the corresponding adjustment from outside NDC to inside NDC. So in a way, there's an incentive because there's more potential for projects the wider your NDC, rather than a lack of ambition. But maybe I've misunderstood the question. On the last point, how do we avoid double counting? Trade IPMOs. IPMOs. Trade Article 6 compliant IPMOs only. Then you are avoiding double counting because you are applying a corresponding adjustment, full stop, if you really want to avoid double counting. If you wish to have a non-correspondingly adjusted climate contribution, follow the same path, the same procedure, just don't apply a corresponding adjustment.
Thanks very much, Fenella. If I may ask the other speakers to be a little bit more concise, I think we are going to be kicked out of the room.
I'll be quick. Brazil, I think that the challenge is, of course, that the climate does not count about if a CO2 emission is inside or outside the NDC. It cares about CO2 emissions. So I think this is a great challenge. You need to be super clear on additionality. That I think is my point on that. Double counting, I agree with you. Trade something that is verifiable as possible. But I would also argue that it's not, it would be good if there is someone who can say then if it is in ITMO or not. Okay. I think that there is a big problem with data generally in the CO2 measurements. We know that if you just summarize the CO2 emissions that companies say they have, you don't get to half of what they actually have, right? So there are lots of issues with data, and I think that needs to be addressed as well.
Thank you. Kari?
Yeah. With the knowledge, I mean, what happened in the very early Kyoto days, there are tons of pre-Kyoto deals, and they were sort of done before Kyoto was in force. And I mean, that helped really to shape the market. I mean, it's a piloting, and then most of those projects we were able to move them into real Kyoto world. Not all, but many. So that really helped the market to grow. Piloting early, people taking some risks, governments.
Yes,
thank you.
Yeah, I think we're in a funny kind of just about starting part of a piece of time where there's about to start being some ITMOs traded, and some voluntary carbon credits traded with corresponding adjustments. And for the last year or so, all we've heard from brokers and traders and investors and buyers is, can we have a corresponding adjustment? Can we have a corresponding adjustment? And to your double counting question, there's a real question as to whether voluntary credits need them. Like, they don't really, but if you want to retire them in Singapore and not pay the tax fee, then yeah, you do need a corresponding adjustment. If you want them for COSIA, then yeah, you do need a corresponding adjustment. But actually lots of VCM trades don't need them, but brokers want them anyway because it sounds cool. But I guess to the point from the gentleman from Sri Lanka, I think governments are really under pressure because there is this, we want CAs, to get the framework done quickly. But equally, I think we should all back off and let governments have the time to do the capacity building, to do things properly, to get the legislation through. Like, ask any government in the world, the US, Sweden, Ghana, whoever, to come up with a whole new framework, build a new capacity, build a new department, build a new registry. Like, of course it takes time. And we have this slightly weird system, particularly with our investors at the moment, where people are like, okay, well, instead of putting our 1 million, 10 million, whatever dollars into country A, we want to put it into country B because they have the framework. And that's cool and great for country B, but there's a lot of countries that don't have a framework. So I think over the next year or two, we'll be in this wanting to be fast, but wanting to get it right balance. So hopefully Sri Lanka with GGGI's help or with learning from others can get there at the right time to make sure you don't lose out on there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Actually, I agree with the responses that have been already said. Just one point on the scope. If something has not been covered in the scope, I just want to remind all of us that every 5 years we need to update our NDC. So 2025 is just in the corner. So we have just 1 year left. And another thing related with the update is the successive updating needs to be more ambitious than the previous one. So I don't know how we are going to really tackle with this thing. We are already struggling to acquire the resources to meet the targets that are set right now. And in 25, we'll have more ambitious, 2030 more ambitious. So that is something we really need to keep in mind also. Thank you.
Thank you. Sandra?
Difficult to be the last because everything that I wanted to reflect on is already been said, and we are running out of time, but really short. So I wanted to reflect on the double counting. So if you don't want to do the corresponding adjustment, then you really need to make sure that that there's no double ownership of the emission reduction. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking with an applause to the very disciplined. With that, I would like to thank also the great engagement for the public. I think, if I may, just one word, I think we hear that we need to build trust in all the markets with high integrity, both in voluntary carbon markets and also Article 6. Thank you once again for participating today.
Det är lite fånigt, men okej.
Can we have a picture
Ja, ta en bild med alla talare.